Don't Visit the Bad River Indian Reservation. Written by Bavio 8891. I don't know if I'll survive the night out here, so I'm trying to post this story on July 16th, 2017, in hopes it gets back to my family. The news needs to know about this, and when I die, I won't be able to tell anyone else. I just pray that someone finds my phone so that it can get some reception and warn people about the Bad River Indian Reservation. I want anyone who finds this phone or happens to read it, should my connection be good enough to get this post through, to have the whole picture. So I may as well start from the beginning. A nice long weekend of solitude is what I needed to unwind and to get rid of this writer's block. And I couldn't think of a better place for that than the northern woods of Wisconsin. I would often make the 5-hour drive up there on 4-day weekends and stay with a friend in Ashland or Rhinelander to pass the time. It was the middle of July, so there weren't too many holidays coming up that would drive up the hotel prices in the area. So I hopped on Airbnb and I started searching. It was only about 15 minutes into looking for a place when I came across a nice, cozy-looking cabin. The $50 a night price tag wasn't too shabby, especially since it rented the entire cottage. I quickly read through the description. 4 small bedrooms, a double bed in each, a living room, a bathroom, and a pond out back that feeds out to the Chickamalgon Bay. And there were plenty of hiking trails directly behind the cabin. I was sold. Sure, there were some quirks. Located on Bad River Indian Reservation. Any problems with the locals, just tell them that you're staying at the Garden House. Should problems persist, call the Ashland Sheriff. As I read this, my brow furrowed. Was that a normal thing? I half reconsidered when I read, "Park in the parking lot and leave your things in the car. It's a mile walk to the cabin. Keys are located in the shed. Feel free to use the ATV to get your stuff from your car so you don't have to carry it the whole way." Now, I wasn't against long hikes. It just seems strange that there wasn't a drive leading all the way up to the cabin. Despite all the red flags, I booked the cabin from Friday through Monday for the upcoming weekend, and I began to pack. I leisurely read a few reviews about the place as I folded clothing. The tip of "bring a gun for safety" popped up a few times. Apparently, there were wolves and bears in the woods. I assumed that, given the location in the woods and its proximity to the nearest town, bringing some form of protection was recommended. So I packed my 12 gauge, just to be safe. I arrived Friday afternoon and found the parking lot the website had spoken of. It was fairly out of the way and hard to find if you weren't really looking for it. I jumped out of the car and I popped open the trunk to grab my shotgun. There were still a few hours of sunlight left, but the animals here may be less wary during the day, and I wasn't going to take any chances. As I was loading a few shells into my gun, I heard the sound of an engine behind me and rocks popping under the tires as the vehicle turned into the lot. "Hey, this is Indian land. What the hell are you doing here?" a man asked. His sharp brown eyes were trained on me. "If you're poaching, I'll kill you quicker than you can train that gun on me," he stated, the barrel of his pistol poking out from over the window. No, I started hesitantly. I had never had a gun pointed at me before, and believe you me, it's not a pleasant experience. I'm staying at the Garden House," I told him. "Oh," he replied, dropping the pistol on the passenger seat. He looked up at the trailhead that led into the woods and then checked his watch. "You'll want to get a move on. The sun's going to go down soon, and we've got mongrel dogs in the area." Thanks," I half whispered. "I'll keep that in mind." The man smiled a nearly toothless grin and nodded back before turning around and driving off. I watched him go for a minute before I decided that it would be best to get going sooner rather than later. I locked my car, shoved my keys into my pocket, and slung my shotgun across my back before I headed to the start of the trail. The walk was actually quite pleasant. By the time I got to the property, the sun was well below the horizon. I walked out back and I took a deep breath, the clean air swirling around inside my lungs. I gave a loud, satisfied exhale as I looked across the grounds. There was a nice-sized pond that was connected to a river that meandered across the property, as well as a few trailheads that snaked their way off into the woods. I decided to head down to the pond and sit for a while on one of the few chairs that were laid out. I sat in silence and awe as I looked around at the scenery. I only lingered by the pond for a few minutes before I called it a night. The next morning, I woke with the sun. I threw on a long-sleeved t-shirt and a pair of shorts before slipping on my pair of running shoes and sliding my shotgun onto my back. I shivered a bit at the chilly morning air, and I stared at the 3 trailheads for a minute, trying to decide which one I should take before finally settling on the path to the right. 10 minutes into my run, or at least I thought that it was 10 minutes, I had sort of lost track of the time. I had been mesmerized by the beauty of the bright green leaves in the morning sunlight. I suddenly heard a voice from somewhere off the trail. "Hey, who's there?" they called. I stopped and looked off in the direction the voice had come from. The forest floor was dense and overrun with brambles and roots and fallen branches that had accumulated over the centuries that these trees had been there. I couldn't see anyone, but with the overgrown vegetation, I could have just been missing a non-moving figure off in the distance. Hello?" I called back, waving an arm. "Who's there?" they called again, and I shook my head, completely confused. Hey, my name's David," I called. "I'm staying at the garden place." Wolves howled somewhere in the distance, beyond the voice. It caught me off guard. Aren't wolves nocturnal, I thought to myself, standing on my tiptoes to see the man calling to me. The wolves howled again, this time closer. "Hello? Who's out there?" a woman's voice called. She sounded like she was probably with the man, a couple out on a walk. But their voices sounded worried. I was worried. I had just heard wolves howling not 50 yards away. "I'm gonna shoot you!" the man yelled out as the wolves sounded again, almost right on top of us. I heard barking and the woman screamed. The man made a startled noise, and only one more sentence floated across the air amid the barking and snarling that had begun. He screamed. I heard rustling and twigs snapping off to my left, followed by the screams of the woman again. I quickly unslung my shotgun and fired a shot into the brush before cycling the shell and taking aim again. The gray shape of the wolf took off away from me, back into the woods. "Help!" the man cried, and I ran towards him, my gun at the ready. "Help!" he cried again, closer now. "Where are you?" I yelled, constantly scanning my surroundings, listening for any signs of movement. As I slowly approached where I thought the couple was, my foot kicked something. I chanced to glance down and I saw a camcorder. It was an older model that looked like it had been lying outside for years. I hesitated, getting an uneasy feeling in my stomach. "Hello?" I yelled again, desperate to try to find the hurt couple. "Where are you? I'm coming to help." I stood rooted to the spot, my ears straining for any sign of noise, but the forest was silent. I cautiously reached down and picked up the camcorder, and after putting my hand through the handle and placing my hand back on the pump of the shotgun, I called out again. "Can you hear me?" I screamed as loudly as I could. I waited for only a minute before I backed slowly towards the trail. There was something definitely off about this. The man's voice had been completely alert only moments before. There was no way that he could have passed out that quickly, nor had I seen any hide or hair of the pair. I jogged back to the cabin with my shotgun in my hands, ready to fire at anything that may have come out of the bushes. When I arrived, I immediately went to grab my phone and call 911. The rings were short and interrupted by the terrible service that I had in the area. "Come on, come on, come on!" I whispered to the phone, willing the call to go through. "Come on!"
911, it's emergency.
I heard the broken syllables were music to my ears. I'm at the Garten cabin on the Bad River Reserve," I said slowly, trying to remain calm and as understandable as possible. "I was hiking in the woods and I heard a couple get attacked by wolves. I couldn't find them. They need help," I concluded. Silence. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I was still connected to the dispatcher, so I waited.
Repeat that, sir.
The dispatcher said. "Yes, I'm at the Garten cabin on the Bad River." The phone beeped 3 times in my ear. I wrenched it away and stared at the screen, the words "call disconnected" blinking a few times before it went back to my phone's home screen. Those people out in the woods were hurt and needed help. But if I left to find them, if the police arrived, they'd have no idea where I'd be. I sat myself down on the couch, trying to calm down. I tried to be as clear-minded as possible. I wasn't first aid trained, and I had no idea how to help anyone that could have been injured by a wolf. I would be no help to those people by leaving to look for them. So I resigned myself to sit and wait for the police. As I sat, my eyes came to rest upon the camcorder. I walked over and examined it. I attempted to turn it on, but as I feared, the batteries had no power. I had no way to charge them, even if I wanted to. I stared at it for another moment, turning it over in my hands, before I saw the tiny door on the side of it. I slid it out of its place and internally cheered. There was an SD card in the memory slot. I popped it out and went over to my laptop, sliding the small piece of technology into the laptop slot. I prayed that it worked, knowing how corroded the memory chips might be if it had been sitting out there for years. My laptop recognized it immediately. There was one file on it entitled 14102010.mov, which I instinctively opened without thinking. I stared at my screen as the file loaded. It only took a moment, though it seemed like hours. The face of a man who looked to be in his mid to late 30s pops up on the screen. He has a fair complexion contrasted by his dark hair and light gray eyes. He's sitting in the driver's seat of a car, fidgeting with the camouflage sweatshirt that he wears. It seems like the camera has been set on the middle of the dashboard before the filming started. On the other side of the screen is a dog, a black lab who's looking lovingly at the man. The man smiles widely and begins to speak.
"Video log for my lovely wife, October 14th, 2010.
He says, his words matching the timestamp on the bottom right of the frame. The timestamp of 0912 blinks in rapid succession.
Okay, here's the poop scoop. We have a 7-hour drive. We're meeting Ebo, Q, and Bart at a cabin that was built in the 1920s on Lake Superior, which is now on the Bad River Indian Reservation. We are going to fish for what I hear are giant northern pike and shoot mallards where some river dumps into Chickawamogan Bay."
The man holds up a hand and starts putting his fingers up as he counts.
1, the directions are bad. 2, the weather looks bad. 3, the river's bad. And the reservation, bad.
He looks over at the dog as if the dog was a co-host on a morning talk show.
That's bad times 4, Boudreaux. I hope good company and a good dog trumps 4 bads, eh, Boo?
He looks back at the camera.
Checklist.
He says, then he crosses himself like a priest.
Spectacles, testicles, wallet, and watch.
He chuckles to himself before reaching to turn off the camera. The screen goes black. There's 3 seconds of nothing, then the video kicks back on. The timestamp now blinks 17:49. He stares out the windshield past the camera as he absent-mindedly pets Boo, who attempts to lick his hand. He sits for another minute or so in contemplation before hopping out of the car, grabbing the camera as he does so. He opens the trunk and sets the camera down, the lens facing behind him. Behind the man, an old red beat-up pickup truck rolls into view. The driver of the truck cranks down the window and leans out. His skin is the color of wet clay and his hair the dark of midnight.
What are you doing on the reservation?
He calls. I immediately recognize the man. It was the same man in the same truck that had greeted me earlier today. Apparently, he was the neighborhood watchdog and had been for many years, at least back to 2010. The man with the camera turns around, startled.
Hi, I'm Colton Gill. I'm meeting some people at the Garden Cabin for the weekend. You know, I knew Old Man Garden.
He pauses for a second as he comes back to reality.
He was an asshole,
he says, then shrugs nonchalantly.
But my old man liked him because he'd bring a case of hams every time he came up. You got any beer? Yeah, cold cans of Point Special,
Colton replied, a small smile creeping into his voice.
You want one? Fucking A,
the man said. Colton turns around and begins rummaging through his bags before noticing the camera is on. He turns it off. Then the video pops back on. The old man is leveling a .22 rifle at something off screen, shoots, and the camera swings wildly, doing its best to focus on something in the headlights of the truck. A buck staggers out of the forest and collapses, a small circle of red behind its front leg growing larger. Boudreaux charges the deer, barking madly as he does so. Colton's voice erupts from behind the mic, booming around the area, crying,
Boo, come!
The dog halts and turns around to look at the 2 men before padding back towards them. There's a sound of a distant screen door slamming shut, and the camera pans in the direction of the sound, though there's no house. It's probably behind all the trees, I thought.
You better get your dog into the car right quick,
the old man says.
These dogs coming will kill him.
Colton makes some clicking noises and Boudreaux runs around to the passenger door of the car before hopping in. Colton slams the door shut, then runs around to the other side, sliding in neatly behind the wheel, shutting the door after himself. He focuses the camera on the woods as a small pack of large, angry dogs come tearing from the tree line, teeth bared and growling. They surround the car, snarling angrily. After a moment, they turn, almost as one, and descend on the deer carcass. He turns the camera towards the dog and sees the old Indian waving his arms to get his attention. He rolls down the passenger window a bit, enough to hear the old man over the sound of the dogs barking and tearing into the deer.
Hey, if there's anything left of that deer when them dogs are done, take it home so you can get some venison. But you better wait till those dogs come back and check you out one more time with their bellies dragging on the ground. If they ain't and you and that city dog of yours get out to have a look, there'll be nothing but elbows and assholes left in the morning.
The camera is almost tossed back onto the dash. Colton pulls his flip phone out of his pocket and stares at it for a few seconds before cursing.
Damn, no reception.
Colton looks up and scans the area outside the car.
I don't know if it's true or not, but they've been seeing mountain lions up here. And I read an article that some wolves killed and partially ate a hiker up in Alaska.
He trailed off momentarily.
And some black bear tore apart a tent and dragged some guy in a sleeping bag off into the woods and killed him and ate him.
At this, Colton visibly shudders and looks to his companion.
Lions and wolves and bears, oh my.
He chuckles at his terrible joke before he fell back into his solemn ways as his mind drifts to their current predicament.
Best to get comfortable, old buck,
he says, leaning his seat back.
This is gonna be our bedroom for a while.
Once the seat was comfortable enough for Colton, he leans forward to turn off the camera. A quiet,
I'm keeping this gun loaded, though,
is heard just before the screen goes blank. When the screen comes back to life again, only the clock is showing. It reads 4:07. A noise emanates from the screen, the throaty growl of a dog, which had been bristling before the camera was cut in. It's Colton's dog, I realized.
What is it, Boo? What do you got?
Comes his voice, wary and alert. The camera has adjusted by now, and the light from the crescent moon illuminates the trees as Colton fumbles around the dark cab of the car. The sound of jangling keys is followed by the unmistakable dinging of a car turning on. He didn't start the engine, just turned the key enough for the electricity to start flowing. The cab light springs to life, illuminating the scene. Colton picks up the camera and turns it to the passenger seat. Boudreaux has his nose pressed against the window. He's growling. He bares his teeth and begins snapping at the window.
Boo!
Colton's voice quivers. The tone made it obvious that this was not normal behavior for his dog. But just as quickly as the light had turned on, Boudreaux was sitting back in his seat, his tail wagging as he glances over his shoulder towards the camera. Colton lets out a long, audible, heavy sigh.
What the hell, Boo?
He chuckles a bit. The laughter is cut short. Boo, without warning, stands, the hair on the nape of his neck and all along his back beginning to bristle. He resumes snapping and barking at the window, though this time he attempts to back away, his rear feet finding their way over the center console and into Colton's lap.
Boudreaux, you're scaring me.
Colton manages, still shaken despite the recent laughter.
What are you seeing? Are you smelling something?
The headlights snap on, illuminating the trailhead.
There's nothing there, pal.
Colton practically shouts over the din that his pet is making. He slowly reaches his other hand out and pats Boo on the haunches. Boo jumps and wheels on the hand, growling again until he realizes what he's done. The dog's face immediately adopts a look that oozes, "I'm sorry," and he practically jumps into Colton's lap and turns to face the passenger window. He's now calmed down from his earlier state. Colton places the camera back on the dash, his frame partially covered up by Boo's head, only taking up the right half of the screen. He reaches back and pulls out a thermos before he unscrews it and pours some miraculously still steaming black liquid into the cap. He takes a large swig of it before he sets down the thermos and expertly opens a pack of cigarettes with his free hand. He jiggles the pack so that one white cylinder sits higher than all the others, and he pulls it from its casing with his lips. The small golden white box is tossed off frame, and his hand reappears holding a black Bic lighter. He thumbs the wheel a few times before the flame explodes out of the top. He leans forward slightly, touching the cigarette to flame, and inhales. He exhales through his nose, giving himself an almost dragon-like appearance for a moment, as he, like the dog, stares out the passenger window. His left hand meanders over towards the door, thermos cap still clutched between thumb and forefinger. He extends his pinky to operate the passenger window and rolls it down only an inch or two.
You think them mongrels are still out there?
He asks Boo rhetorically. He issues forth one loud whistle and waits, though it's met with only silence.
They're gone.
Colton sighs happily.
Up, Boo.
He commands, opening his door. The dog hops out, followed by Colton. It's quiet for a moment. The trunk door slides upwards with a quiet hiss from the pistons. Colton throws on a backpack, slings a holster around his waist, and places a pistol gently inside. He grabs his shotgun and cycles it, a spent shell from the evening before being ejected onto the ground. He grabs a few more odds and ends and checks to see if there's anything else that he needs, and then slams the door shut. The driver door opens again as Colton grabs the camera and sets off towards the trailhead, the sky just beginning to get light.
Where's the deer?
He muses to himself, kicking the ground with his feet as he walks. His foot finally connects with something, and as he focuses the camera's gaze upon it, the old guy was right, he says, sighing. Look at this. All that remains of the deer carcass is a pool of dried, frozen blood, a few flecks of matted fur, and a partial lower jaw that has several teeth still jammed into it. A sudden, jostling noise erupts from off-screen as Colton flinches before turning the camera. A ruffled grouse explodes from the undergrowth and flies deeper into the woods. Colton turns the camera to focus on Boudreaux.
You ready to harvest some grouse, buddy?
He says, and the dog practically smiles into the camera as the screen drops off into a black abyss once again. It's evening this time as the camera cuts back in, the little 1632 blinking in the corner. It's aimed at a picnic table, the same picnic table that's sitting out behind the cabin that I was currently occupying, which confirmed my suspicions that it truly was the same cabin. There are 3 grouse and a woodcock splayed out on the table's surface.
What a great job you did,
Colton said as he turns the camera to Boo.
Despite my training, you are turning out to be a hell of a hunting dog after all, old buck.
He pans the camera up to the old shed.
Well, let's fire up that ATV and get back to the car so that we can hump the rest of our stuff in, shall we, buddy?
The screen goes black again. The 1636 in the corner indicates only a few minutes have passed. The engine of the ATV can be heard idling in the background. Boudreaux stands aggressively in front of Colton as he walks down the trail, the camera pointing at the ground. The remains of the deer come into frame, but next to it is one of the mongrel dogs from the night before. Its throat is slashed open with a chunk missing from its side.
This wasn't here this morning,
Colton says warily.
Wolves in the wire, Boudreaux.
He concludes.
We're not going anywhere up here without Mr. Smith and Mr. Wesson,
he says. He sighs before finishing up his thoughts.
We best get everything from the truck in one go.
And the screen cuts to black again. 1720. The camera looks like it's set up on a kitchen counter. The floor near the entrance is visible. Boudreaux is scarfing down a can of dog food as Colton walks from behind the camera to a grouse that's laid out on the floor. He looks like he's about to start cleaning the bird when his phone rings. Colton picks up his cell phone, a look of bewilderment on his face, and he walks towards the camera, kneeling.
Voicemail. What the?
He quickly uses the buttons to call as he mutters a quiet,
How did I get reception?
Under his breath. He leans into the camera so the microphone can pick up the call. The message begins with a high, ear-piercing tone that makes Colton flinch and nearly drop the phone before holding it a healthy distance from his ear. The voice on the recording is choppy and hard to understand.
Hey, Colty, it's Q. Win, Ashland, Ebo spent night jail. Idiot over street with the RV. DUI. Clearing up the mess now. Heading up ASAP.
The voice cuts off immediately. Colton hastily tries to redial the number that left the message, but almost as soon as he puts the phone to his ear, he closes it in frustration.
No coverage. How am I getting voicemails?
He reaches up and, once again, the screen goes black. 1943. The sun is going down as Colton sets the camera down on the picnic table facing the inlet from the river. It really did resemble a pond or a small lake more than an inlet. He walks out onto the pier and sets a shotgun against one of the posts before picking up a fishing rod. He pulls a small fish from a bucket next to him and hooks the fish before throwing it into the water. And he watches as the bobber hits with a satisfying plop in about the same spot. Colton turns to Boo, who was lying next to Colton's chair on the pier.
Hey, Boo.
Colton begins as he reaches over and lovingly taps his shotgun.
If we get any mallards flying in, Misters Smith and Wesson are at our beck and call.
He sits in his chair and leans back, taking in the setting sun.
Now this is the kind of multitasking I love. Oofda.
Colton reaches down under his chair and produces a can of beer, which he cracks open, the sound echoing in the small clearing surrounding the pond. Just as he's about to take a sip, he sits bolt upright.
Bobber down,
he says as he lunges for the rod and begins fighting the fish, straining to keep it close while not letting the line snap. As he hauls it in triumphantly and holds it towards the camera, he says, slightly louder than needed,
looks like a 37-incher.
He begins the work of extracting the hook from the large fish's mouth. Then he looks upwards and lets out one loud laugh and hastily tosses the fish, hook, line, bobber, and all into a separate bucket. He grabs the shotgun and brings it to bear upwards. There's a moment of silence before a deafening bang resounds around the clearing. A second report comes shortly after this, and the bodies of 2 ducks fall into frame, tumbling down into the lake.
Fetch 'em up,
Colton calls, waving his arms from Boudreaux towards the pond. The dog springs to life, galloping down the wooden pier. He leaps into the water and brings the first bird back to shore. As soon as he's plopped it down at Colton's feet, he peels back down the pier for the second retrieval. As he's waiting for Boo to come back, Colton quickly unhooks the 37-inch northern pike, and then resets the hooks before casting it back into the river once Boo is on dry land. He walks back towards the camera, praising his dog as he does so. A few moments of only a bobber fill the screen as Colton continues cooing to his dog with "good boys" and "there you goes." When the two walk back into frame, Boo is still dripping wet. Colton looks down at him.
It's beer 30. Want one?
He chuckles to himself and ruffles the dog's head as he sits back down into his chair, grabbing his beer. He takes a few sips as he continues staring at the lake. But not long after this, the bobber is ripped under the water without any warning signs. Colton wrenches the pole out of its holder and begins to try to reel the fish in, standing up after only a few moments. After a short, intense battle, the line snapped as Colton was pulling the tip of the rod up, which nearly sent him back into the water. He curses and pounds on the deck. He pushes himself up and stares at the now black water.
That was a 50-incher, Boo.
He sighs heavily.
Maybe a 60-incher. You aren't supposed to be here.
A high, shrill voice calls from off the camera. Colton whips around as Boo turns, growling lowly. Colton curses from his end of the pier and yells,
You scared the shit out of me. Boo, quit it. Heel. You aren't supposed to be on this land.
The woman repeats, not walking closer as she warily eyes the dog.
This is an Indian reservation. Yeah, I know.
Colton begins.
But this place is supposed to be grandfathered in because it was built before the reservation was. The Indians were here first.
The woman snaps, her tone low and serious.
Look,
Colton says, exasperated.
The owner and two of my buddies will be here in just a little bit. He can explain it to you. I only got here a little while ago. You're a liar!
She shrieks.
You arrived last night and were killing our grouse. You killed our ducks and our fish.
Colton jumps in shock at the sudden shift in her voice. He hastily turns around towards the end of the pier.
If you want the northern or a few grouse, I'd be happy to give you some.
He finishes and pulls the large fish out of the bucket, but stands there dumbfounded, staring at the camera. He looks down at Boo, who is looking up at him.
Where did she go?
Colton sighs and drops the fish down into the bucket, then sits dejectedly in his chair. A wolf howl is heard from what seems to be nearby, and Boo immediately starts barking angrily. Colton reaches out to pet the dog's head and calm him down, but Boo takes off down the pier, to the shore, and off into the woods.
Stay!
Colton yells when Boo first took off.
Boo, heel!
He cries. The man grabs his shotgun and runs full speed off the pier, out of frame, just like his companion. His cries of
Boo
are mixed with the sounds of the dog barking and wolves snarling. 3 distinct shots ring out loudly and echo. Boo's voice turns from aggressive barking to painful, shrill cries and whimpering that quickly get quieter before fading out. Colton's cries of Boo also cease. I stared at the screen in disbelief for a few seconds, when a man's panting was heard from the screen. A phone's voicemail tone goes off just as the camera is picked up. The only thing heard before the screen goes black is Colton's voice.
Boo, you stupid SOB.
2133 blinks. The rest of the screen is darkness.
Boo, you stupid SOB.
Colton whispers. The sound of a holster being unbuttoned is heard. Then a bottle being unscrewed, a glass being slammed onto the table, a shot being poured, a lighter flicking a few times, and Colton inhaling deeply. He pours a second shot and drinks it.
I gotta get a hold of myself.
He whispers to the darkness.
I'm so scared. It's mucking up reality.
He exhales again, and a bit of cigarette smoke wafts into the camera's light.
Focus on your hands, just like Dad taught you. Focus on your hands.
He gives one single quiet sob.
God, I wish Moose was here.
His breaths become less erratic and more uniform.
He could calm me down until I was thinking straight again.
There's a long moment of silence, only broken by Colton's puffs on his cigarette. When he speaks again, it's with resolve.
Go and find your dog, Colton. You're sitting up here mustering your courage, and Boo could be bleeding to death. You have enough firepower to turn a few charging wolves. You can do this.
He takes one last deep breath.
The only thing to fear is fear itself,
he says.
What would FDR do? What would Jesus do? What would Moosey do?
Colton says and gives himself a reassuring little laugh.
I know what Moosey would do. Semper Fi, Moosey.
Colton cycles a shotgun and picks up the camera. He seems to be holding it around head height, as if resting it on his shoulder, while his right arm is seen holding a pistol. The next several minutes are uneventful. Colton comments on the sound of loons in the distance, says he can follow them back to the cabin should he get lost. He yells "boo" a few times while walking into the woods, and spinning a few times trying to see more than normal in the pitch black. His movement comes to a sudden halt as he turns back the way he was walking, when a pair of eyes shine out from behind a tree several yards away and about 8 feet off the ground. The eyes disappear behind the trunk. Colton freezes.
Hey, who's there?
Colton yells. The eyes slowly peek out again from behind the tree. They almost seem to wobble and then descend a foot or two.
Who's there? Boo?
Colton takes a few slow, measured steps closer. The vague gray outline of a head materializes around the eyes, and he freezes again.
I'm gonna shoot you.
Colton warns as the head ducks behind the tree again. Colton alters his course to go around the tree, giving it a wide berth. He begins muttering to himself.
Headshot, Colton, headshot.
He pauses as scratching begins emanating from behind the tree. His breaths come almost ragged due to fear. His right hand fumbles with the pistol as he tries to cock the hammer with a shaking hand. He takes one last jump around the base of the tree. The hissing gray face materializes again as Colton pulls the trigger. Smoke from the gunpowder momentarily blinds the camera as another shot rings out in the night. As the smoke clears, Colton's breath has almost turned to hyperventilating. The fog clears and the outline of a dead possum lying on the leaves takes over. Colton sighs heavily and sets the camera down. As he mutters unintelligibly to himself, the distinct sound of a disposable lighter is heard again, followed by a long exhale. Loons call in the distance, their tremolo growing louder. The sounds swiftly pass overhead and begin fading away.
How am I supposed to find my way back now?
Colton exclaims, his voice taking on a higher pitch as his fear begins creeping back in.
I'm seriously turned around. I can't even hear the waves of Lake Superior anymore. I need to sleep and start again in the morning.
The camera shuts off. O210 blinks in the corner.
Where's the light button?
He demands, but pauses. Nothing but the time is on the screen, and nothing but the running of the camera is heard. It was wrong. There were no frogs, no croaking, no crickets, no chirping. It was absolute silence. Footfalls in the distance can be heard, followed immediately by Colton, what I assumed was spinning to face it. He cocked his pistol and says in a voice that is quite absent of fear,
Who's there?
Finally, his fingers find purchase and the lamp clicks on. The footfalls stop.
Boudreaux?
Colton queries, his voice tinged with fear now. His voicemail alert sounds again, but he makes no move to grab it, which made sense. One hand was on the camera for light, the other was on his pistol.
Boo, come here, buddy.
Colton says, his voice attempting to sound happy and playful, to draw his dog from behind the tree his camera was focused on. Sudden movement comes from behind. Colton swings the camera around and, without aiming, fires. The muzzle flash illuminating the surroundings for only a moment. A gray head about 10 feet off the ground, whose eyes stare unblinkingly back at the camera in the distance.
Damn possums,
Colton spits.
I'm gonna come back here in the morning and eat you for breakfast.
The eyes move slowly forward, and Colton takes a step backwards, but trips over a root. He and the camera tumble to the ground and the light goes off. Colton fires from his prone position, each of the 4 shots illuminating the screen for only a fraction of a second. A head, antlers, teeth, eyes, and then silence. Colton fumbles in the darkness again, inching closer to the fallen camcorder before his fingers find the prize they had blindly searched for. He flicks the light on again. He turns as much as he can from a sitting position, stopping off to his left, a single pinpoint of light glimmering in the distance. He heaves himself to his feet and quickly strides the 30-some paces in that direction. As he closes the remaining distance, he stops.
Boo's collar,
he says. He collapses, the camera still pointing at the collar hanging from a low tree branch.
Boo, you stupid SOB.
Colton whimpers, his voice finally breaking into tears as he puts his face into his hands. He angrily pushes himself up and grabs the collar from the branch, falling back to his knees, crying,
You stupid SOB.
over and over again. He drags himself back to the camera, and as he reaches to pull it to him, his hand is covered in a red substance. The same substance that's seen on the collar briefly before he sets the camera in his lap, pointing up at his face. His voicemail tone sounds again, and he pulls his phone out and wipes the tears away with the back of his other, reddened hand. He puts the phone on speaker and sets it down next to the camera as he rummages for another cigarette.
Hey, Colty, it's Q. Look, I don't think we're gonna be making it up there anytime soon, but I promise we are still coming. There's just a couple of things we gotta take care of to spring Ebo, so we'll see you soon. Sorry again, buddy.
Colton grabs the phone and dials, only to be met by a pleasant female voice.
I'm sorry, you've traveled outside of your coverage area.
Colton slams the phone shut out of anger and stares into the camera.
It could be Sunday before anyone knows I'm dead or missing.
He takes one last puff of his cigarette and checks something on the camera.
The battery's running low. I'm gonna save some juice for later, maybe try to sleep a bit.
He pauses after he's turned out the light. The stars above are only broken by a few bare tree limbs and the outline of Colton's head.
I pray I'll get out of here. I love you, baby.
The outline of the video player's program popped up as I stared at the black screen, shocked and at a complete loss for words. That was the end. I hesitantly opened the file explorer on my laptop, and I opened the SD card. The only file on it was the video that I had just spent several hours watching. I glanced out the window. The sun had set long ago, and the stars were populating the sky now, far too many to count. I grabbed my shotgun and stepped back out onto the porch to look at them, still wary of the wolves that I had seen earlier today, and the strange being that I had seen Colton shoot at on the video. I stared at the night sky, my eyes roving their depths, wishing that I could find answers amongst their numbers. The rustling came suddenly and from about 30 yards off the path that I had taken earlier. "Hey, who's there?" came the man's voice again. My heart stopped. It was the same man from earlier. He had lived. I hopped off the porch with my shotgun and pulled my phone out, switching to the flashlight app. "Hello?" I called, holding the light aloft so the man could find me. "Hello, sir, are you there? I heard you earlier," I yelled, I'm seriously turned around here," I said as I jumped forward, my light even higher than before. Here, come towards my voice," I called. "I'll get you out of here and home safe. Did your wife make it?" I kept walking towards the voice, afraid that if I stopped, he'd be even further away. I was worried about you two. I tried to call the cops," I continued. As I kept walking deeper into the woods, I listened for the man. Twigs breaking, leaves shuffling, anything. "Who's there? Boo? I'm gonna shoot you." I froze. The voice, the exact same voice I had been chasing, was now coming from behind me. And I hadn't seen anything on my way past. As I began to turn, the sound of a gunshot sounded. It seemed like it was almost 50 feet away. I turned and in one swift motion dropped my phone, leveled my firearm, and pulled the trigger. The moment after the sound had dissipated, a demonic roar suddenly sounded from where my barrel had been pointing. Then another off to my left, and a third slightly off to the right of the first. I didn't hesitate, I ran. I scooped up my phone and I took off like a shot into the trees, all sense of direction abandoned in favor of survival. I saw something in the flash when I fired my last shell behind me. A canine-like head, dead, hollow eyes, a large set of antlers protruding from its skull, and a freakish, gray, human-like body. And the teeth. Hundreds upon hundreds of sharp, 3-inch long, needle-like teeth. I don't know how, but I think that I've lost my pursuers, at least for the moment. I can hear them, though, in the distance. They're coming closer. Send anyone. Send the police, send the army, send the whole military to take these things out. If we don't, they'll just get bolder. They'll come into villages, then towns, and eventually to cities to lure victims away before... Well, I don't know what they do, but I'm assuming it's not good. They've got Colton Gill, and it looks like they're going to get me too. Get someone here, but whatever you do not visit this place by yourself.